Hello, everyone. I am Craig Escude. I'll be kind of hosting this webinar today, and I'll introduce our guest in just a second. And we are very happy to have all of you here. I am a family physician and board certified in family medicine, as well as by the American Academy of Developmental Medicine. And I'm currently the president of IntellectAbility. And I'd like to introduce our guest today, Mr. Bob Sattler. He is a partner with Support Development Associates. He is also a Charting the Life course ambassador, a mentor, a person-centered thinking trainer, person-centered mentor trainer, lots of great things person-centered related through the learning community for person-centered practices. And he brings over 30 years of experience in supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who have co-occurring mental health needs and behavioral challenges. So I'd like to welcome you, Bob. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Craig. It's so nice to be here.
So I'm going to start off with a quote that you mentioned a while back. Person-centeredness is within boundaries, being able to make decisions for your life that help you have positive control. Can you expand upon that just a little bit?
Sure. I think if we look at person-centeredness, it really is how do we treat people like people? And one of the things that we know from a neurobiology standpoint is that our brains really are hardwired to want to have autonomy over our lives, make decisions for ourselves. And unfortunately, as we've seen in a traditional service system, many times people with developmental disabilities in particular haven't really had that opportunity. People have made decisions for them. And so person-centeredness came around to really think about what can we do to support people. And one of the things, particularly with this aspect of within boundaries, one of the things that is a huge myth about person-centeredness is that if you're going to be person-centered, you're going to let people do whatever they want, so they have positive control. And that is a myth because in reality, no one gets to do everything that they want. We all have boundaries. So within those boundaries, how do we make those decisions for ourselves that lead our lives to something that is meaningful and purposeful for ourselves? And so if we look at that in how we apply our strategies to support people, it gives us those boundaries and that ability to support people in the way they want to be supported and helping them make opportunities and decisions for their own lives. So we really want to think about how we make that happen.
I really appreciate that you said that within boundaries, because I've heard that as well, and actually kind of thought that years ago when I first began hearing about person-centered thinking. It's like, so people can do whatever they want. I'm like, I can't do whatever I want, and it's like, yep, no, that's not it. There are boundaries, and it's finding that balance as I understand it. I'm sure you can state it better, but that balance between, what is important for a person to be safe and to have good health and all of these things, but also what's important to that person for whatever they want in their everyday life.
And I think what's important is we need to look at what's important to people first. What are the things that make them happy, content, satisfied? And then how do we look at what's important for people, that health and safety stuff, and make sure that they are in context with one another. Yep. For a long time, we've been focused on health and safety and not so much happiness. And we all want to be happy.
Makes perfect sense.
And I think, my background is coming from the provider world. And one of the things I really experienced is, we tell our employees and our staff that part of what you need to do is help people make choices for themselves. And so many times we've heard a bad thing happened and they go, well, it was his choice. And I think what we're forgetting, again, with that boundary perspective, our role really is to help people make informed choices. So what are we doing to make sure that they've got the information in a way they understand so that they can then figure out, how do I want to deal with this?
So this is, obviously a wonderful way to support people. And we've been seeing and hearing a lot more in terms of rules and regulations and guidance, and the final rule saying that those of us who work in the field of supports and services for IDD really need to incorporate person-centered thinking, person-centered practices into the way that we support people. So this is a kind of a great lead in into some of these regulations that are out there. And if you could tell us a little bit more about some of the home and community-based services regulations relating to person-centeredness.
Sure. Well, back in 2014, Medicaid and Home and Community-Based Services really said we need to do things differently in our service system. So let's look at how we become more person-centered. And really, you can read all the regulations, but it really comes down to we should be treating people like people, whether they're using Medicaid services or not. So what can we do to make that happen? And that means we need to still keep that health and safety stuff, which has been a big focus of HCBS, Home and Community-Based Services, because it really is an insurance company. Medicaid is an insurance company. So of course, health and safety is paramount. But we've learned that people also want to be happy, not just healthy. They want to be satisfied, not just safe. So how do we really make that happen? And so that's what the regulations are all about. And one of the big focuses on the regulations is that we need to be doing person-centered plans. That really is the culmination of all of this stuff that we've discovered. And it helps us really move someone's life forward in the way they want it to move forward. And that's what it's all about. With the HCBS rules and regulations, it also says, health and safety is still a big part of this. So we need to look at how we have a good balance. As I mentioned earlier, the health and safety needs to be in context with the happiness, which we do in our own lives. We go to the doctor says, you need to lose weight, you need to exercise. So we come home and immediately clean out the cabinets, join the gym, and are there 24/7. Yeah, we don't do that. Come on.
Yeah,
But we
right.
figure out how do we get healthier so we're still doing the things we like to do. And, we have that cheat day. So that's no different for people who are receiving services and supports through HCBS. And the plan helps us figure out how to make that happen. If there are situations where, going back to those boundaries, if there are things that the person may not be able to do, or if they do it, it puts them at risk and maybe harmful to themselves or harmful to other people, we still need to have modifications in the plan that says, realistically, these are some rights restrictions, if for lack of a better term, about how we support people in a way that makes sense. So modifications are still built into the plan so that it supports the person to the best of their abilities. And so we want to be very mindful of that. Again, it's not a free-for-all, but it's also not a thumbs down on the person and containing them. It's how do we find that balance?
Yeah.
And another, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you too about the discovery process. I think that's so interesting sometimes in the sense that there are actually skills that we can utilize to help supporters and support teams to be able to help determine, even for people that maybe don't use words to communicate, what is important to them in their lives. And that's such an important component of this as well.
It really is. And we let people know what is meaningful to us, what helps us be happy, what helps us be satisfied through our words and through our actions. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes our words and actions don't line up. And if that's the case, we always need to ask why. And so those discovery aspects are really critical. Our discovery has typically been around health and safety needs. But now we need to figure out what is important to people, what makes them happy, like relationships or things that they like to do during the day, things that they like to have as possessions. We all have, many of us have collections, and we don't, well, how many of us have heard with our collection, oh, Craig, I think you have enough of that stuff. You shouldn't have any more, but you still go out
I
and get
have
it
heard
anyway.
that, I must say, from
Yeah,
my wife a few times, but
yeah. So you become sneaky about it, right?
you got it.
Because it's meaningful to us. And that's the thing that we need to recognize with what's important to people. It's important to us. It may not be important to other people, but it's important to us. And so we need to recognize what that is for the people we provide supports to
Yeah.
and help them have it in their lives.
And we've had some advancements over the years in incorporating these practices. And I know the Administration on Community Living and HHS have helped with that, right?
Yeah, both association of the Administration for Community Living, which unfortunately has gone through some devastating changes
Yep.
currently, and Health and Human Services have really looked at what can we do systemically to make sure that we are now looking at those important two things for people. So we're kind of playing a catch-up game because we haven't done that for a long time.
Sure, sure. And there are challenges. We know that there are challenges in implementing these plans, just like implementing anything, but they can be done, and they're very important to the people that we support. So we're talking on this next slide a little bit about expectations and accountability and critical thinking. Would you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really critical, a lot of times when we think about person-centeredness and building it into our system, that it is just for the people who are using our services and supports. But the reality is, this is human stuff. If we are not treating our employees in a person-centered way, there's no way that it's going to be trickling down to the people we provide supports to. So we really need to think about, from an administration standpoint, how are we making sure that our employees are feeling valued, that they're feeling empowered, that their voice matters. That's going to be a good role model for what we want them to do with people we provide supports to. We really need to help them think critically about things. I actually worked with one organization that their incident management system, when an incident occurs, we typically fill out an incident report, and the incident report always has follow-up on it. And a lot of times the follow-up is, this is what I want you to do next time so it doesn't happen again.
Mhm.
And when we do that, we don't help our employees to think through, how do they handle the situation? And the reality is, our employees are all over the place. We're not in one setting anymore. So they need to be able to think critically. So they actually used one of the person-centered thinking skills known as the 4+1 questions. And part of their follow-up is they would bring in the person who was involved in the incident. And first question is, so what did you try when this happened? So talk about it. And then they say, so what did you learn from that? Critical piece. What did you learn? What were you pleased about with how the situation went? What were you concerned about with how the situation went? And then the follow-up, the +1 question, so what would you do if this happened again? And it really helped them think things through and have more control of the situation in a positive way that really supported them to be a better employee and the person themselves having a better life.
So
Result,
that's, yeah,
they've had a lot of fewer incidents because people are being more critical in their thinking.
that again, it all makes so much sense. And I would even take it a step further. When we do these things for people around us, for our family members, for our friends, we probably could enhance our own personal relationships using some of these skills as well, too, right?
Yeah, I think every married couple should be using this stuff.
I don't disagree there. And you mentioned this specific skill, this 4+1, and there are ways to learn these skills through different types of training. And at the end of this, I'll tell everyone about a training opportunity that's coming up. So you brought up a topic when we were talking earlier about 9 critical things that need to be addressed to strengthen a person-centered system or to move an organization in that direction. So if you would, tell us what those 9 things are.
Yeah, this is what a lot of our work is currently, and it really began with the whole concept of person-centeredness. It was one person at a time, and that left a lot of people who weren't being offered the opportunity to have those positive opportunities in their life. And part of the HCBS final rule was really, how do we systematize this? And how do we take it from an individual standpoint to a system standpoint? And these 9 elements really help the system really think about how we can really move forward collectively, and making sure that everyone has the opportunity to have positive control over their lives. First, it starts with our mission and our vision and our values. We all have vision statements and mission statements. Usually they are nice posters on the wall or in our policies and procedures manual, but we really need to think about, how are we using these on a daily basis to guide our efforts, and are our practices in alignment with our vision and mission. And our values, which is something that we may talk about, we really need to use our values as the day-to-day barometer of what we expect from those who are delivering services and supports. So it really is a way to measure, are we living up to our vision and values and mission? Then we want to think about advocacy. A lot of times in our system, advocates may not have the best reputation. It may be an adversarial kind of situation, an us and them. And we really need to be mindful of the fact that advocates really are our partners. They let us know how things are going. And so advocates, there are internal advocates to the organization who may be pushing the envelope and say, you know, we've been doing this and it's just not working. What can we do differently? What can we improve on? As well as external advocates, families, people who are using services, and what are they telling us about how we need to make those changes? So it really is, how do we work in partnership with advocates? And we are all in the same boat. So let's figure out how we work together to make it happen.
Absolutely, great point.
The thing we also need to be mindful, and it's kind of a buzzword these days, trauma-informed care. But notice that it's not trauma-informed care. We look at more from a discovery standpoint. Reality is we've all had trauma in our life. Some of it may be more traumatic for others than it is for some other folks. And it's really up to us to let us know where it's going. We really should not be treating trauma because we're not those informed experts. We don't have that clinical expertise to make that happen. But we may discover trauma in the course of our work. And so when we do, how do we support people? You know, one of the biggest things that people in our service system may have trauma about is staff turnover. Staff is constantly changing, you know, and think about all those relationships that they just disappear and never come back. That can be pretty traumatic for folks. For some people, they don't care. For other people, they don't want to form any other relationships because they never know when the person's going to go. When we discover that, we really need to think about, and this is from the work of Dr. Karen Harvey, that is a great trauma-informed specialist.
Totally agree. Love Karen.
So really thinking about it from what can we do to help people feel safe where they are? What can we do to help people have control of the situation where they're in? And what sort of connections with other people do we need to be supporting them so that they have that sense of safety and control and connection to really minimize some of the impacts of trauma that may be experienced? And I do think it's something that we need to be mindful of, because in our system, well, actually larger system, from a 2019 report from the federal government indicated that 80% of people with disabilities have experienced some form of significant trauma in their life. So we are going to be coming in contact with it. We really need to figure out how we support people through it.
Yeah, there's a much higher incidence of abuse, including sexual abuse as well, which is only one type of trauma. And there are lots of types of trauma, including institutional trauma from people that have been in institutions, and so much more. We could talk about that for a whole
Right.
session for sure.
And when we think about outcomes, we really need to be mindful of what do people want to have accomplished in their life. And outcomes really are different than goals. And a lot of times we as a service system have developed goals that don't lead to any outcomes for folks. Say we have somebody who needs to improve on his hygiene, so he's got to take a shower every single day. Why?
Yeah.
If we learn that maybe he wants to have a relationship with somebody, showers are probably going to help.
And if you're a little cleaner and smell nice, it may help.
Right. So we want to think about what those outcomes, where are these skill building things going to lead? So we really need to get better at doing that. And this is one of the requirements of the final rule. If we are doing that, we also need to think about those who are providing supports to people, and what sort of training do they need? What sort of skill building do they need? What sort of expertise do they need to really be engaged in supporting the person? And then we also need to be looking at organizational culture. Organizational culture can really move us forward with person-centeredness or hold us back without even realizing it. Organizational culture is that under the surface stuff about how we really operate. And sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. We say we're person-centered, but we don't really treat our employees that way.
Yep.
So we really need to make sure that everything lines up, which is the next thing. How are we really focusing on alignment to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction? And it's probably one of the biggest things our system needs to look at, because we have lots of rules and regulations that are very similar, but slightly different. And speaking from a provider standpoint, I've had multiple operating systems for all of the same outcome, but they need to be done differently. And that's not a very good use of resources. So how can we be effective and efficient in thinking about our policies, our practices to really move things forward? Another area, which is the 8th area, is all about quality management. And quality management is one of those things that really needs to evolve in our system. Our quality management system has really been based on health and safety, pass, fail.
Yep.
And when we are in a person-centered system, it's no longer a black and white world. Did it happen or did it not happen? Because everybody's different. Everyone has different requirements. So our quality management system, while keeping the health and safety stuff, because that's paramount to what we do, we also need to be thinking about how do we build in satisfaction? How do we build in the quality? Are people satisfied with what services and supports they're receiving from us? Does it meet their expectations? Do they get the outcomes that they want? And we haven't designed a quality management system that really captures that. So it's how do we make that happen? I always equate it to you go to a restaurant and you see the menu, there's something you want, but it's not quite the way you want it. So you tell the waiter or the server that you want it a different way. And then when you get it, does it meet your expectations? And if it does, great. It's not quite meeting your expectations, but you're still satisfied with it, I'll do it, or do you send it back? And that's what we really need to be thinking about from our service system. Are our services exemplary? Are they satisfactory? Or is someone going to leave us because it's not what they want? We are really good at measuring process, not outcomes. So we really need to think about how we change that.
I like that concept as well. And then it
And,
leads us to leaders.
right.
Yeah.
None of this happens. It actually begins and ends with leaders. If leaders aren't committed to making this happen, it's not going to happen. Leaders need to be open to hearing what's not working in the organization and how do we work collectively to make it better. What are the things that are, coming from a leadership role, I get really tired of hearing all the stuff that's not working.
Yeah.
So if you're going to tell me what's not working, you better tell me what is
Bring a
working.
solution.
Right. Well, bring the solution is great, but I also want to know, what are we doing well? What
Yeah.
do you want us to keep doing? And then let's figure out how we build on it and how we change the things that need to change. So all of these efforts really move our system forward. We can't, if we're missing one of them, things won't work.
They're all huge components. I want to remind everyone that if you have questions, please type them into the questions little box in your control panel. And there are also a couple of handouts. I'll remind you of those again, but you do have a handout of the PowerPoint of the slides and a handout on person-centered thinking as well too. So, this is great. These are wonderful things. And I'm kind of playing the devil's advocate here. But you know what? We just don't have time to do all of this. And now our resources are becoming limited and we just can't do all of this, right?
So let's start with resources. A colleague of mine really talks about the fact that, let's think about this. Typically when things aren't working, we have two things we approach things. We need more staff or we need more money. We are in the worst staffing crisis that we've ever been in. Don't expect it to get better anytime soon. And we know, just from a federal standpoint, what is the money going to look like? And how is it going to be distributed? Big changes. So we can't really look at resources as being the issue. We actually need to think a little bit differently. And my colleague says, I really believe that resources are abundant. It's the connections that are scarce. And if we think about it from that perspective, it means we need to be looking at different partnerships. We need to be looking at different ways to pull things together. Not everything has to be funded through the system. So what are we doing to look at resources in a different way? And that helps us, actually it opens doors for us to try things we haven't tried before. And that's really what this is all about, is how do we try things in a different way? Person-centeredness is not a new concept. I've been in the industry for a long time, and I was supporting people in a person-centered way before we were getting paid to do it, before we were having all these regulations about this. Person-centeredness isn't about the funding. It's about our approach. And a lot of times when we approach things in a person-centered way, it actually helps us save time and money because things are working well.
You end up with people that are being supported to do things that are important to them, which can, and I believe there's data out there to show that it can actually reduce agitated behavior and things like this. You end up with staff who feel empowered to do their job and feel a part of the process. That all of that can only work for the betterment and make things easier in supporting people rather than working against it, is the way I
Right,
would see it.
right. You know, there never has been a rule or regulation that says you can't be person-centered. It kind of hurts my heart that we've had to create a regulation that says you will be person-centered because we haven't been doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
So we do, again, it's not a new concept that funding has been limited, and we will survive and overcome whatever comes our way in this area. But the thinking is the important thing, and that doesn't cost more money usually to help for people to think a little bit differently. But again, we do want to continue to emphasize and support the need for funding to provide supports and services for people with IDD. So as we're getting close to the end here, I want to end with another quote that you mentioned in a podcast we did together. When you listen to people and support them the way they want to be supported, instead of how you think they want to be supported, amazing things can happen. Can you
yeah,
talk a little?
yeah. I think that probably the easiest one thing about person-centeredness is you're always having these epiphany moments. Oh, yeah, that makes much more sense. And for me, it really came down to the fact that we all believe in the golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated. But I think person-centeredness and this approach is more of a platinum rule. And the platinum rule is treat people the way they want to be treated. Because the reality is, how you want support may not be how I want to be supported. How I want support may not be the way you want support. So it's all about discovering what works for the person. And then if we act on that, it creates a much more partnership role. It creates opportunities for people to have lives that are meaningful to them. We will have fewer incident reports. We'll have fewer people on medication or levels of medication that they're currently on. We'll have happy staff because they are engaged in things as well. So it really is listening to people rather than thinking that we as a professional know what's best for them.
Well, Bob, I think there are many takeaways from the talk today, but I love the platinum rule because that is so true. You know, treat people the way they want to be treated or supported, and hopefully we'll get that in return. I love that. So I want to remind again everyone that there is a handout. There are a couple of handouts. One is the PowerPoint of the slides today, and also a handout on person-centered thinking. There is a survey that we take very seriously. There should be a link in your chat, but also at the end of the handout, you can also access the survey if you download the handout. We really want your opinions and thoughts and ideas for future topics and future webinars. I mentioned I would tell you about training opportunities. At IntellectAbility, we have regular virtual person-centered thinking training times set up. The next one is coming up soon, June 10th through the 12th. You can click the link if you have the slides downloaded, or you can scan the QR code, or just go to our website and look at person-centered services, and you can sign up for the person-centered thinking training. You don't need to have a whole group. You can sign up individually or have just a few people. They're great training opportunities, and we always have a lot of great feedback from these training opportunities. I will also plug the IDD Health Matters podcast. Bob was a guest. We talked about Karen Harvey and trauma-informed care in today's webinar. Karen has been a guest as well too. There are many people who work in this field in all different ways, from physicians and nurses and case managers and direct support professionals and leaders of agencies and organizations, as well as self-advocates and people with disabilities telling their story about health and wellness and how they work in this field. So I'd love for you to check that out as well. And again, don't forget about the survey. We really want your feedback. So Bob, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights with us today. And I look forward, as always, to talking with you again at some time in the near future.
I really appreciate it, Craig. Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.